In January of 1814, a woman named Marie Dorion rode 3 days through frozen wilderness to warn her husband his life was in danger. She was too late. What she found waiting for her, and what she did in the weeks that followed, alone, with 2 small children, in the dead of winter, hundreds of miles from safety, has earned her a nickname among historians today. They call her Oregon's Revenant. This is her story. Long before the winter that would define her place in history, Marie Dorion was already living a life most people today would find almost unimaginable. Born around 1786, Marie was a member of the Iowa people, and by her late 20s, she had married a man named Pierre Dorion Jr., a fur trader and interpreter of mixed French-Canadian and Sioux heritage. In 1810, when Pierre was hired by John Jacob Astor's Pacific Fur Company to join a massive overland expedition to the Pacific Northwest, Marie made a decision that would set her apart from nearly every other person on that journey. She went with him, and she brought their children. Of the dozens of men on that grueling, multi-year trek across the American continent, Marie Dorion was the only woman. She carried an infant. She walked the same brutal distances as the trappers and traders around her, through mountains, deserts, and unmapped wilderness, arriving finally at the newly established Fort Astoria on the Pacific coast. For most people, surviving that journey alone would have been the defining achievement of a lifetime. For Marie Dorion, it was only the beginning. In the summer of 1813, Pierre was assigned to a new expedition, a beaver trapping venture into the Snake River country of what is now Idaho, under the direction of a man named John Reed. Marie and her 2 young sons, roughly 5 and 2 years old, went with him once again. The party set up camps along the Boise River, trading and trapping through the fall, generally maintaining friendly relations with the local Shoshone people in the area. But not everyone in the region welcomed their presence. A group referred to in historical accounts as the Bad Snakes, a faction of the Bannock people, had grown increasingly hostile toward the fur trappers moving through their territory, and as winter set in, that hostility turned violent. On the evening of January 10th, 1814, a friendly Shoshone visitor arrived at the camp where Marie was staying with her 2 boys, carrying news that would change everything. The Bannock War Party, he told her, had already attacked and destroyed one of the Pacific Fur Company's outlying camps. The trappers and traders there had been killed, and now the war party was moving toward the very camp where Marie's husband, Pierre, was working alongside 2 other men, Jacob Reznor and Giles Leclerc. There was no time to waste, and no one else available to carry a warning through hostile, snow-covered wilderness in the dead of winter, except Marie herself. She loaded her 2 young sons onto a horse and set out immediately into the freezing terrain, riding through the night and the days that followed, pushing through winter conditions that would have been dangerous even for an experienced group of armed men, let alone a woman alone with 2 small children. For 3 days she rode, following the Boise River toward the camp where her husband and the others were working their trap lines. When she finally arrived, she was too late. What Marie found at that camp is difficult to describe without confronting the full brutality of it directly, because that is exactly what she was forced to confront, alone, with her children beside her. Pierre was dead. So was Jacob Reznor. Only one man, Giles Leclerc, was still alive, grievously wounded, having survived the attack, but with little strength left. There was no time to grieve. Marie lifted the wounded Leclerc onto a horse that had wandered back near the ruined camp and began the desperate journey back toward the main trading post, hoping that reaching safety and shelter might still save his life. It didn't. Leclerc died before they arrived, and when Marie finally reached the main camp, hoping to find safety, support, and other survivors waiting for her, she found instead a second scene of total devastation. Every man stationed there had been killed as well. In the space of a few winter days, Marie Dorion had gone from a wife and mother traveling with a functioning trading expedition to the sole adult survivor of an entire massacre, alone in hostile wilderness, hundreds of miles from any safety she could be certain of, with 2 children under the age of 6 depending entirely on her. There was no rescue coming, no search party. No one in that moment even knew what had happened, let alone where she was. She had one choice left: move or die waiting. Marie gathered what food and supplies remained at the ruined camp, loaded her 2 boys onto the surviving horse, and turned west, away from the hostile territory behind her, toward the distant hope of the Columbia River and the Pacific Fur Company's post at Fort Astoria, hundreds of miles away. What followed was 9 days of walking through some of the harshest winter terrain in the American West, the Blue Mountains of what is now eastern Oregon, a range that, even today, sees brutal, unpredictable winter conditions that challenge experienced modern hikers with proper cold weather gear. Marie had none of that. She had a horse, whatever supplies she'd managed to carry from the camp, 2 young children who could not walk the distances required on their own, and her own knowledge and endurance. Deep snow made travel exhausting and slow. Temperatures in the Blue Mountains in January regularly fall well below freezing, and exposure in conditions like these kills far more efficiently and far more quickly than most people realize. Every day of that 9-day trek carried a genuine risk that any one of the 3 of them, Marie or either of her sons, might simply succumb to the cold before finding any kind of shelter. By the 9th day, near the base of the mountains, exhaustion made the decision for her. Marie could not continue pushing forward through the deep snow indefinitely, not with 2 young children whose small bodies had far less tolerance for the cold and exertion than her own. She made the only choice that gave them a real chance at survival. She stopped. Using what little material she had available, Marie built a crude shelter. Some accounts describe it as constructed beneath a rock overhang, reinforced with whatever hides she carried with her from the trapping expedition. When those materials weren't enough, she made a decision that speaks to exactly how dire the situation had become. She killed the horses, the animals that had carried her family through 9 brutal days of mountain travel became, in that moment, the resource that would keep her sons alive through the weeks that followed. Their hides reinforced the shelter walls against the wind and snow. Their meat, smoked and rationed carefully, became the only food Marie and her 2 boys would have for the next 53 days. 53 days, nearly 2 full months, hidden in a makeshift shelter in the Blue Mountains, in the depths of winter, with 2 small children, living on rationed horsemeat, waiting for conditions to improve enough to continue the journey west. There was no way to know during those weeks whether help was coming. No way to know if anyone even understood what had happened to the camp, or was searching for survivors. For all Marie knew, in that shelter, she and her sons might be entirely alone in the world, with no choice but to wait out the worst of the winter and hope the mountains would eventually let them pass. Historical accounts describe Marie deliberately limiting her own food intake during this period to ensure her sons had enough to survive, a detail that, more than almost any other, captures exactly what carried this family through 53 days that, by any reasonable measure, they should not have survived. By March of 1814, with the worst of the winter beginning to ease, Marie made the decision to move again.
The remaining journey was no less demanding than what had come before it. Marie and her 2 sons pushed on through the last of the mountain snow, eventually reaching the Walla Walla River and following it for roughly 15 more days toward its confluence with the mighty Columbia River, the same river that, if she could reach it, would finally put her within reach of help. In total, by the time her journey was complete, Marie Dorion and her 2 young sons had crossed approximately 250 miles of hostile winter wilderness, entirely on foot and on horseback, with no support, no rescue party, and no guarantee at any single point along the way that they would survive to see the next sunrise. Exhausted, half-starved, and pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance, Marie finally spotted something in the distance that meant the ordeal was, at last, coming to an end. Smoke rising from a village along the river. She had reached the Walla Walla people who received her and her 2 sons, gave them shelter, food, and safety after months of unimaginable hardship. According to her own later account, Marie and her boys waited there through the remainder of the season until canoes finally arrived that spring to carry them the rest of the way down the Columbia River to Fort Astoria. And, at long last, to genuine safety. Every single member of her immediate family had survived, not because anyone came looking for them, not because of luck alone, but because one woman, faced with the complete collapse of everything and everyone around her, made one difficult decision after another for months without anyone else to rely on. Marie Dorion's story didn't end at Fort Astoria. She went on to live for decades afterward, eventually settling near what is now St. Louis, Oregon, remarrying twice, and raising a family that extended well beyond the 2 sons she had carried through the Blue Mountains that winter. She died in 1850, in her early 60s, having lived a full life that very few of her contemporaries, in an era when wilderness expeditions killed experienced men regularly, could have expected to see. For over a century afterward, her story remained largely overlooked by mainstream history, overshadowed by other, more widely taught figures of westward expansion. In recent years, historians have increasingly recognized just how extraordinary her contribution and her survival truly were, earning her comparisons to figures like Sacagawea and the nickname that captures her story better than almost anything else could: Oregon's Revenant. What makes Marie Dorion's story so remarkable isn't a single moment of heroism. It's the accumulation of dozens of impossible decisions made correctly, one after another, over the course of months. Riding into danger to deliver a warning, making the brutal choice to move rather than wait, knowing exactly when exhaustion meant it was time to stop and shelter instead of pushing forward into deadly risk, and rationing her own survival to ensure her children's. She didn't have rescue equipment, trained guides, or modern cold weather gear. She had judgment, endurance, and an unwavering refusal to let her sons become casualties of a winter that had already taken everyone else around her. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. Every week, we bring you true stories of survival against impossible odds and the darker moments of history that deserve to be remembered. A like helps stories like this reach more people. And if you want to make sure you never miss the next one, tap that notification bell. I'd love to know what you thought of this one and which story you'd like to hear next. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching and for spending this time with us.